The glass shattered across the marble floor just as the waitress stumbled backward, clutching the torn fabric against her chest. For a moment, the entire luxury restaurant fell silent. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard the cruel laughter of the woman standing before her, a woman whose diamond necklace cost more than the waitress had earned in a year. But nobody expected what happened next. The restaurant doors suddenly opened, and a billionaire walked in, his face turning cold when he saw the frightened waitress, the torn dress, and his own wife standing over her. Before we begin, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life, please like, comment, share this story, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. The waitress was named Marisol, a 24-year-old woman who had learned early that life did not always give people what they deserved. Every morning, she woke before sunrise in a tiny apartment above an old bakery, packed a simple lunch, and took 2 buses across the city to work at the prestigious Belmont Royale. She wasn't there because she dreamed of serving wealthy people. She was there because her younger brother, Cassian, needed expensive treatment after an accident had left him unable to work, and Marisol had quietly taken responsibility for keeping their little household alive. She rarely complained. Even when customers ignored her, even when supervisors demanded impossible perfection, she smiled, straightened her uniform, and kept moving. Her greatest fear wasn't being poor. It was failing the people who depended on her. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the enormous glass windows of the restaurant, turning the crystal chandeliers into rivers of gold. At table 17 sat Serafina Vale, a wealthy socialite known throughout the city for her sharp tongue and impossible standards. She wore a cream-colored designer dress and enough jewelry to attract attention from across the room. She was waiting for her husband, Cassian Vale, one of the youngest billionaires in the country, a man whose business empire stretched across technology, hotels, and finance. Serafina was irritated because Cassian was late, and when people like her were angry, they often searched for someone powerless enough to blame. Marisol approached the table carrying a silver tray. She carefully placed the meal in front of Serafina and apologized for the delay, explaining that the kitchen had received several orders at once. Serafina looked at her uniform as though it had offended her personally. She complained about the temperature of the food, the arrangement of the plate, and finally the small stain on Marisol's sleeve that had appeared when another customer accidentally bumped into her earlier. Marisol apologized again and offered to replace the dish. Instead of accepting, Serafina stood up and grabbed the front of Marisol's uniform. The sudden movement ripped the fabric near her shoulder. Marisol gasped and instinctively pulled the torn cloth together, her face burning with humiliation as several diners stared. Serafina continued insulting her, demanding that she kneel and apologize for embarrassing her. Marisol refused quietly. She wasn't rude. She simply stood there trembling and said that she would apologize for any mistake she had made, but she would not apologize for being poor. That sentence changed the atmosphere. Serafina's expression hardened, and in a burst of anger she yanked the dress again, tearing it farther. A glass fell from the table and shattered against the floor. Marisol stumbled backward, tears gathering in her eyes. She wanted to disappear, but she remembered Cassian waiting at home, and she knew she couldn't afford to lose her job. Then the restaurant doors opened. Cassian Vale walked inside. He had just returned from an international business trip and had come directly to surprise his wife. But the smile he had carried into the restaurant vanished the instant he saw Marisol standing there with her torn uniform and lowered eyes. His gaze moved to Serafina. Then to the ruined fabric. Then to the broken glass scattered across the floor. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Cassian didn't shout. Somehow, that made his silence more frightening. He walked toward the table and asked what had happened. Serafina immediately began explaining that the waitress had been disrespectful and careless, expecting her husband to take her side as he always had before. But Cassian noticed something she didn't expect him to notice. Marisol's hands were shaking. She wasn't trying to defend herself with lies. She wasn't demanding money. She was simply trying to cover herself and maintain her dignity. Cassian looked at his wife and asked whether she had torn the waitress's dress. Serafina hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Cassian had spent years building his empire, but his grandmother had taught him something more valuable than business. She had once been a hotel cleaner who was treated cruelly by wealthy guests. She used to tell him that a person's true character wasn't revealed by how they treated powerful people, but by how they treated those who could do nothing for them. He had forgotten those words during the years of wealth, but seeing Marisol standing there brought them back with painful clarity. He turned to the restaurant manager and ordered that Marisol's wages be protected, her medical and emergency expenses covered, and the incident documented. Then he looked at Marisol and apologized, not as a billionaire, but as a human being. He told her that nobody had the right to humiliate her because of her job or financial situation. Marisol finally broke down. She admitted that she couldn't afford to lose the job because her brother depended on her income. Cassian asked about Tavian, and when he learned about the medical bills, he offered assistance without demanding anything in return. But Marisol refused the money at first. She said she didn't want charity. Cassian smiled gently and told her that dignity didn't mean refusing every helping hand. Sometimes dignity meant accepting help so you could stand again and eventually help someone else. Serafina watched the exchange in silence. For the first time, she seemed to understand what she had done. Her anger had always been easier to carry than her insecurity. She had spent years measuring her worth through expensive clothes, exclusive parties, and the attention of powerful people. Yet standing beside a frightened waitress who possessed almost nothing, she suddenly realized that Marisol had something she had lost long ago: humility. Cassian didn't publicly destroy his wife. Instead, he told her she needed to leave with him and face what she had done. He also made it clear that their marriage would not excuse cruelty. That evening, Serafina visited Marisol's apartment, not with security guards or expensive gifts, but alone. She apologized. Marisol didn't immediately forgive her. She simply listened. Forgiveness, she knew, was not something people could demand. It was something they had to earn. Weeks passed. Tavian received the treatment he desperately needed, and Marisol continued working. But something changed at the Belmont Royale. Cassian established a fund for employees facing family emergencies, inspired by what had happened. Other wealthy guests began treating the staff differently. And Serafina, slowly and painfully, began volunteering with organizations that help struggling families. She never forgot the day she tore a waitress's dress. It became the day she finally saw the ugliness inside herself. Months later, Marisol stood beside Tavian as he took his first steps without assistance. She cried so hard that she could barely speak. Cassian was there too, standing quietly in the background. He had expected gratitude, but Marisol simply hugged her brother and thanked him for believing she could survive the hardest season of her life. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that kindness matters, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Sometimes one act of compassion can become the beginning of an entirely different life. And before we end, make this your special commitment. Comment, kindness still matters, if you promise to treat every person with dignity, no matter their job, clothing, or bank balance. Because in the end, the richest person in that restaurant wasn't the woman wearing diamonds or the billionaire who owned half the city. It was the waitress who had every reason to become bitter but chose to remain kind. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness doesn't just change someone else's life, it saves your own heart from becoming something you never wanted it to be.